you work in a school district that is almost 90% students of color, and your work is not grounded in, does not amplify the message that their lives matter, then you're not doing the work of the common good. And so I would like to think that the resurgence of Local One under Karen's leadership made that a headline. I would also say, too, is that we're not afraid to fight. I mean, many of the leaders in our movement are history teachers. And so we know that when you get something, it's not because the 1% bestowed it on us. It's not because we said it politely. It's not because someone thinks we should have it. It's because we've taken it. And we've taken it because we've organized people in a way where they can see themselves, their needs, and their leadership in the work that we do.
Thank you. I know we have a good 12 minutes left, so I'm just, but I want to get to, there's two huge questions I want to get to, which is, one, some guidance from all three of you. How do you see the intersecting crises that we're in right now? The public health, the reckoning with racial justice, the economic crisis. How do you see those crises, and how do you see our role as both educators and I should correct myself, I said K-12 instead of pre-K-12 in terms of this panel, but how do you see our role as educators and our public schools and our role as unionists and activists? And frankly, Diane, I know you're a writer, but you're an activist too, and you're an honorary activist of ours. So how do you see these crises, and how do you see our role in these crises and in fighting them?
I think the important thing for teachers, and specifically for teachers' unions, is to be the spokesperson for the teaching profession, and also to take particular care to fight off the efforts to privatize education during the pandemic. I think that everybody is very eager to get school working again, but also very fearful that it will be open too soon and that the lives of educators, support staff, and children will all be put at risk with premature openings. We've seen countries like South Korea and Israel open their schools after a prolonged delay and then close them, some of them down again because of outbreaks. We really don't know how this pandemic is going to work out, whether it's certainly not going to magically disappear, as Trump says, but we have to be very cautious about the lives of children and adults. And I think that right now the country is looking to you and to Lily of the NEA and to local leaders to be the spokespeople for the teaching profession, and particularly to ward off the effort to try to turn public education into a tech enterprise. I think if we learned one thing from this pandemic, it's that people really do value in-person instruction. They want to get back to school. They don't want to have distance learning perpetually. I think that if the only good thing that's come of this pandemic, and I don't think anything good has come other than that, is that parents are really disgusted with distance learning. And I hear this from my own children and grandchildren. They want to be back in school. They want to be with their friends. They want to be with their teachers. Teachers want to teach. That's what the profession they joined. So we have to keep alive the dream that when school resumes, and someday it will be better than ever. There will be a case to be made for greater equity, for greater investment, for greater equity. And I think that this pandemic has also revealed the tremendous inequities. And I want to echo something Stacey said. I've been wondering why broadband is not as free as radio. Why can I turn on the radio and get the news for free, but then if I go to cable, I have to pay to get the news, the same news? Why isn't broadband as easily accessible to everyone as the municipal water or in this case, the radio? Because this should not be an inequity. Every child should have the machinery they need to access their teachers. But I think that the long-range vision has to be that when education resumes, it must be with professional teachers who have years of preparation and training and experience so that it's real school and not pretend school.
So Stacy, I'm going to go to Stacy first and then Tika on this. You have thought about, I know you have thought about this a lot. So how do these three crises intersect, and what as a union, not just what is you, but what as a union, your local, national, what should we be doing right now?
So I have thought about it a lot. Obviously I'm Black. I have Black children. I come from a Black family. So the sanctity of Black life is something that, means a lot to me. That being said, our union in Chicago is clear about what liberation looks like. And liberation is both interracial, it's intergenerational, and it requires the labor movement to both provide infrastructure and to ally themselves with the movement for Black lives. That's number one. Number two, we cannot save children. What we can do is that we can destroy systems of oppression. Like, that's our work in this moment. My work is to not make Black children comfortable with racism and white supremacy. My work is to clarify their value as human beings and to create structures, to fight for structures, to win structures that create spaces for them to fully realize their potential. And then also, we have to work within the communities where we're located. We keep talking about, it will be damaging for students to not be in school buildings without acknowledging that our educators, they continued to teach. The building was closed,
Right.
but the Zoom was still on. The Google Hangouts was still on. We made it happen. We put broadband on buses. We went to folks' homes and we figured it out. So this concept that we shrink in this moment and don't open up, new fronts and new opportunities for the type of justice and equity that our students need, we got to get bigger. We got to get more aggressive, because this moment is one thing. This moment where 54% of Black men are unemployed. This moment where we see Black and Latinx and immigrant communities dying and being infected with COVID higher than anyone else in this country. But what's to come is the state budgets in 2021. And those same Black children, brown children, immigrant children that these headlines tell us America is concerned with will not take a moment, will not breathe long enough to not cut our budgets. Austerity is on its way, which means our pensions are back in focus, larger class sizes are back in focus, school communities without a music teacher, an art teacher, and a librarian, those things are back in focus. So what we have to do in this moment is to continue to organize with our parents. They too are workers in nursing homes, in hospitals, and grocery stores. Our work is to build organization across sectors. Our work is to lift up the sanctity of our students' lives. Our work is to make sure that the communities where our schools are anchored have what they need, and that not only are we willing to strike for our safety, but we're willing to strike for the safety and the prosperity of the people and the communities in which we serve.
Which actually We can't hear you.
I have time, Randy. Put me on, will you?
Okay, we're putting
So
you
they can hear
on.
me?
So I'm going to do an introduction, if I may.
But why don't you spend more time with your vice presidents? Spend more time with them. I have time. I really do, Randy.
You're on. You're in. You're on. Believe it or
Well, I'll
not.
tell you what, but you should talk more about the staff. They're doing a hell of a job.
They
really.
are.
I have time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. But that, you know, this is, to everyone who's here, this is how he cares. I love that, you know, we're going to have to get you an AFT mask. This is not the one with the filter in it, though. We've got a new.
Have one.
So I want to
All right.
actually, before the Vice President speaks, but you know what that last panel was, and I hope you heard me, about how I saw the change when in that, and I've said this to your wife, that work you made us do in those joint task forces, the one that I had the honor to serve on the pre-K through secondary one, it was quintessential Joe Biden, because it was, you know, you're asking experts to really help guide. You worked out, you know, process with Bernie so that people saw themselves in it. But when we really pressed about how to do things better, given the data we knew, given the expertise we had seen, I watched your people on the task force, your staff on the task force, not say, well, we have to, you know, these are the problems with it. I watched them say, let's figure out how to get this done. And I had heard you during one of our, you know, during the Forum on Education, talk about how we need to deal with the whole child, coming from your experience, and you know, and you've been so open about, you know, being a stutterer and having that kind of experience. So I've watched you, you know, talk about what high stakes testing has done, and I saw the change in the platform. And I saw the change in that committee. And that's why I wanted to say to those three ladies who are tough cookies that I see real hope in terms of that kind of change. But that's who you are, Mr. Vice President. And I just want you to know, before we start with the questions from our amazing people, our amazing delegates, that just yesterday, our body, our delegate body, in this virtual way, endorsed you for president. You know that our executive council did it in the primary, but yesterday, by over 90%, you are now our endorsed candidate for the American Federation of Teachers for president, and we will do everything we can to get you elected, not just to defeat Donald Trump, but I want to say this again for our members. And I've said this to you, and I want them to hear it again, which is, you are caring, you are effective, you are honest, and you are decent. This is not just about defeating Donald Trump and all of the things that he is and isn't in terms of chaotic, narcissistic, and things like that. What you bring at this moment of time is what a nation needs in terms of the empathy, the understanding, the caring about people, the listening to people. I saw that throughout the Obama administration. You know, I've often said that you are our go-to person. And just, it is just that in some ways, you deciding to run at this moment, pre-COVID, and what we now need with three intersecting crises, two of which you know how to solve. A health crisis. Actually, I would argue you can solve all three of them, but you've solved a health crisis before. You've solved a recession before. So in some ways, the country is, and we are really blessed that you decided to run this time, and that you will be getting, not only you've effectively gotten the nomination, but you will be, after the Democratic National Convention, the Democratic candidate. And ultimately, we need you. We all need you as president. We need a country that can heal. We need a country that sees its soul. And we need a country that is about how we get to our better angels. And that's why I am so appreciative that you're here today, that I can say that to you directly in front of everyone. It's not just about the platform, as important as that is. It's about who you are and what you bring with you, your character, your soul, your empathy, your caring. This country needs that right now, and we are really, really blessed that you offer yourself up and decided to run at this moment.
Well, Randy, thank you. I can't tell you how much it means to me, just personally, just you and me. It means a great deal to me. And as you know, I'm often introduce myself appropriately as Jill's husband. But I want to thank you, Randy, for not only your support, but your friendship. I understand Lin-Manuel was there earlier.
Yes.
And
he had
so
an announcement.
To hear that he endorsed me. Yeah, I know. I heard that. And I want to offer my congratulations to Loretta, your secretary, treasurer. I tell you what, it's well-deserved retirement. But I know you're not going to retire. I've never found an educator that really ultimately retires. But for all of you, the most important profession in America, that's what you're part of. And I don't just say that. I've been saying that for a long, long time. I'm not being solicitous. It's not because I'm married to an educator. It's because you're the ones who give these kids confidence and believe in themselves. And, I think the single most important thing that a child can be given, the single most important thing, is confidence. Confidence that they can do something. Confidence to equip them to succeed. At least that's how I viewed it my whole life. And these, as I've said before, these aren't somebody else's kids. They're all our kids. They're the kite strings that lift our national ambitions along. And who has hold of the kite strings? You guys. You guys. You're the ones. So everything that will be possible for our country tomorrow is going to be in large part thanks to what you do today. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, that's real. That's just a fact. As Jill said, any country that out-educates is going to out-compete us. I know there's one issue that's the top of the mind right now, and that's the pandemic, and it should be the top of the mind. We saw this challenge coming, but we've been calling for the president to address this since as early as January. But Donald Trump failed to take any action and testing and tracing, everything we need to get this under control, to get our educators and students back to the classroom safely. And every single opportunity has missed a chance or taken us in the other direction. There's no mystery about what needs to be done. When we were faced with a crisis back in 2009, we knew we had to stand up for educators. So when the president asked me to oversee that Recovery Act, over $800 billion, we allocated $60 billion then, $60 billion to local school districts and saved 400,000 education jobs.
Yes, you did.
Because the states didn't have the money.
Yes, you did.
Didn't have the money. But this time, when the pandemic struck, Trump has dropped the ball again. He didn't make you a priority. And now state and local governments are facing huge, huge budget shortfalls. And Speaker Pelosi and the House did their job. They passed the so-called HEROES Act, providing $915 billion for state and local governments. But Trump and the Senate Republicans refused to do their job.
Yep.
The proposal put forward by Mitch McConnell is completely out of touch. It's meager support. They're offering for schools and local governments. It isn't close to what's needed. And it's being used as a cudgel to force schools to reopen when they may not be ready to reopen. No, and it doesn't fund educators. This isn't a game.
Right.
We've lost more than 900,000 education jobs since the pandemic started due to the budget cuts. That's absolutely unacceptable. 2 weeks ago, I put out my roadmap for opening our schools. Another plan I hope the president would at least listen to. It's a plan driven by science. But Donald Trump may contend to continue to move and force educators and students back into the classroom without a plan to keep them safe. It's not about whether or not, this doesn't fly with me. It's not about whether or not he cares about education. It's about he wants to make sure that he looks better.
Yeah.
We need to implement national testing and tracing rules. You get your nurses the protective gear they need. Provide an adequate supply of masks to every school in America. Set effective national safety guidelines. Empower local decision makers to decide what's best for their community at the moment. And provide $90 billion in emergency funding to preserve these jobs and keep schools open. You know, we need to get this done. We need to get it done now. But this is only the start, because once we get ahead of this pandemic, and it's going to be tough, because you remember, Randy, I remember you asking me in one of the forums I was with, one of your folks asked, well, what am I going to do when I'm president? I said, it will depend on what I'm left with.
Right.
No, I really mean it. Look at the damage that has been done just since March by this president not dealing with this pandemic. And God knows, if you look at the projections now, what's going to happen between now and January of 2021, it's catastrophic, some of the stuff being talked about. So we can't just go back to the way things were.
No.
We have to build back better. That means tripling funding for Title I schools, giving raises to the teachers that deserve it, getting you the resources you need. We need, look, we're going to double the number of school psychologists and counselors and nurses and social workers in schools. We badly need them, especially now.
Right.
We can tackle the mental health crisis. We can build the economy that's responsive to the needs of working families. We can provide affordable quality health care and elder care, ease the burden of caring for loved ones. We can make sure those of you who are early childhood educators can get a raise, new training and new opportunities. You know, here's the bottom line. So often, it's in the wake of the darkest moments that America's forged some of the most remarkable eras of progress. And I believe we're on the brink of one of those opportunities. If we can overcome this crisis, and I believe we can if we start doing the right things, we'll be in an incredibly strong position to make progress. So thank you for allowing me to join you. I know you know me, there's a lot more I want to say to y'all, but there's so much you've done already. And, you know, I want everybody to know, if any the press is listening, and they do know, you don't just represent educators. You represent a whole range of, you represent nurses, you represent across the board. But every one of them are on the front line. Every one of them. Every single one of them. And so I want to thank you for letting me join the fight with you. And Randy, thank you for your personal friendship. I appreciate it.
And I want to just also say to you, Mr. Vice President, I want to thank your wife, Jill Biden, your wife, and Elizabeth Warren did a reopening panel with us a couple of weeks ago, which was fabulous. And we had leaders from around the country. This is in advance of you putting out your plan. We had leaders from around the country talk about a lot of the issues. And you could see their guidance in your plan, and you know, you often tease about how your wife is an educator, but I think people don't actually realize that she has kept working as not just as a K-12 educator when you met her, but as a college educator when you were vice president. And and there have been times when we were supposed to get together, but she was teaching, and she would never, ever, ever give up her teaching. And it is just that kind of commitment to children and to kids that we see from your family over and over and over again. So I want to say thank you to her.
She's going through what a lot of your, well, I want to say one thing about this. She's going through what a lot of you are going through right now. She's learning, because you can be teaching how to teach remotely. And she's spending hours, 4 hours a day, trying to learn the technology to be able to teach remotely. I mean,
yeah,
you know, so
it's hard.
An educator never stops getting educated.
All right, exactly
Anyway,
right.
sorry.
And we know it would be back in school, but we were also really appreciative, and I'm about to start the panel as I say this, we're really appreciative of the point you said about you know, that you can't reopen schools where they're dangerous, and that it's important in terms of the community and doing that. So, you know, the contrast again with the recklessness with Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos is obvious. So what we're going to do for the next half an hour is that we have three members who are going to actually ask you questions. And so instead of it just being a conversation with us, rank and file members who are going to ask you questions. And the first is Priscilla Castro from the UFT. And I'm going to just turn it over to Priscilla.
Mr. Vice President, as you know, the AFT represent teachers,
Priscilla, how are you?
paraprofessionals.
Priscilla, the Vice
Higher
President, can you hear the Vice President? He just said hi.
Hi,
I don't
how are
think she can
you?
hear me, but that's okay.
She just did.
How are you? Where are you speaking to me from? Where are you now?
I am
Where
at
are
home.
you now speaking to me? I mean, where? Where's home?
In Brooklyn, New York.
Never mind.
Yeah, Brooklyn, she said.
All right, that's okay.
This is
The capital of the world.
exact. This is well. Now that I'm national president, I can't say Brooklyn's the capital of the world anymore. But we do love New York. I think what happens is the timing of the Zoom sometimes gets, there's a little lag. Okay, Priscilla, go.
I'll be quiet.
Okay,
And here's the
Mr. Vice
question
President,
and answer.
as you know, the AFT represent teachers, paraprofessionals, higher ed, nurses, and health professionals. All of us in different ways are on the front line helping each other during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of COVID, states, cities, and towns had to pause much of the economy in order to prevent the virus from spreading. Now revenue is plummeting, unemployment is soaring, and they have huge unexpected expenses to protect health and safety. A situation made worse from the disinvestment we have had since the 2008 Great Recession. Funding that has not been returned. Nearly every community is facing cuts. These cuts will affect education, healthcare, sanitation, reduced transit services, and operating hours at government offices like the DMV, and threaten public safety, like closing fire stations and emergency responders. Already more than 500,000 educators have been let go, and is estimated without federal aid, states and localities would need to lay off 2 million employees or more, which would be devastating to our public schools, universities, public services, our communities, and this will have an effect on our children's future. So my question to you, Mr. Vice President Joe Biden, what would the Biden administration do to help save the many jobs that are in jeopardy or have been lost, and to help save our communities and our children?
First of all, thank you for the question. Secondly, this whole country owes teachers like you a debt of gratitude. You made an enormous sacrifice and you show so much creativity. And making the abrupt shift to online learning, preserving some sense of stability and normality for kids and keeping them growing and keeping them learning and the gap from widening. But preparing for the fall now has so much uncertainty. Now, first and foremost, Trump and McConnell have to stop playing political games with the HEROES Act, which is that allows for billions of dollars to go to state and local governments. As I know you know, Priscilla, the reason why cities, counties, and states, all of them across America, are laying off people is they have to balance their budgets. Their budgets have to be balanced. They can't have a deficit. And what happens is, because so little tax revenue is coming in, because Trump so badly mishandled the COVID virus and caused this spiral that's occurred, there is no money to be able to keep necessary people employed. And so what we literally are going to have to keep the nation going. And at a time when COVID has slashed those budgets, state and local budgets, the Trump Republicans are offering nothing to prevent these layoffs of teachers or first responders, or to keep helping residents who need it most. It's unacceptable. You know, it's bad for educators, it's bad for students, it's bad for communities, it's bad for universities, and it's going to further slow the growth and make unemployment even worse. We have to make sure the states and local governments get full funding they need to prevent teacher layoffs, to help schools reopen safely this fall, only if they're in areas that can tolerate it. We have to make sure everyone can vote safely in November. This isn't math exercise. It's about you. It's about making sure educators, healthcare workers, public service workers don't see wages or job cuts. Because when they do, guess what? They put the entire community at risk. When you shut down a fire station, somebody's going to die in that neighborhood when there's a fire. That's what's going to happen. When you close out the ability to pick up the phone and call for help from a first responder, it's causing people great difficulty. When you lay off so many educators and janitors and bus drivers and folks who work in the school system and nurses, what happens? You not only cause them to put them in great difficulty and not being able to go back if they're able to go back, but you do one other thing. You slow the economy even further. Even further. It's an economic interest of the country to get us out of this, to have these jobs maintained. People are dying, out of work, afraid for their children. The clock is ticking, and Congress has to act now. And as I said at the outset, Priscilla, look, we went through a similar thing, not as a consequence of mishandling of a COVID crisis, but because we inherited the greatest recession short of a depression in American history. And the president put me in charge of a program that I had to get almost 840 and $1 billion out in order to keep the economy from going into depression. And what we did, we took about 900 of that to make sure that we, in fact, went out and made sure that teachers kept their jobs, educators kept their jobs, firefighters kept their jobs, law enforcement kept their jobs, nurses kept their jobs, hospital and clinics stayed open. That's what has to happen. That's what has to happen. And it generated economic growth. We came back, the economy grew, but that's what we have to do. And this is absolutely bizarre. And you have, I'm sorry to go on so long, you have a Republican leader in the Senate say, let the states go bankrupt. Well, that's wonderful, isn't it? Let the states go bankrupt. How does that help anyone? Anyone at all? So the first thing I would do if I were in charge right now is I would pass the HEROES Act and get $950 billion out there in order to make sure that we can keep the economy open, the states open, all the major functioning responsibilities continue to be able to be paid.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you, Priscilla. And Priscilla, just for people to know, and for you to know, Mr. Vice President, Priscilla is not just from Brooklyn, but she teaches kids with special needs. And so thank you, Priscilla. Keep up the work. Thank you.
And by the way, Priscilla, if I get elected, we're going to fully fund IDEA.
Thank you.
We're going to fully fund it.
Fabulous. Thank you, Priscilla. Stay safe. And then we have what we've tried to do here is, you know, have 3 people from 3 different areas in the country. And we have Rick Lucas here. And Rick, why don't you tell the Vice President who you are and where you're from?
Hello, Mr. Vice President. My name is Rick Lucas. I'm a registered nurse at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, and president of my local bargaining unit.
Oh-hi-ho.
Nurses and health professionals across the country have been in the trenches taking care of our patients since February, hoping some modicum of coordination would appear over and over again. Amid PPE and equipment shortages, we have watched Donald Trump refuse to fully invoke the Defense Production Act, which has left many of us still with inadequate PPE and an inability for public health officials to conduct testing in our community. We have watched OSHA loosen worker protections during some of the most dangerous conditions some of us will ever work in. We've seen CDC promulgate guidance that was inadequate and has evolved into a website that is hard to follow and contains conflicting standards. Meanwhile, my colleagues and I go to work and take care of patients. We watch our patients say goodbye to relatives on FaceTime and die alone. Many of us go home at night after our shifts without adequate PPE, unable to sleep because we're not sure whether we are bringing COVID-19 home to our kids, our significant others, or our aging parents. The trauma we wear is real, and so much of it was avoidable. Meanwhile, our states and localities are trying to construct and implement disease surveillance programs and a public health system that has been defunded to the point of having no capacity for the robust testing, tracing, and isolation that is needed to stop this virus. I can only imagine how chaotic the distribution of a vaccine will be. And if the health inequities of COVID-19 has exposed are any indication, we should all be concerned and outraged. It will take years to reconcile the missteps and impact of our poor response to COVID-19. My question to you, Mr. Vice President, is how will a Biden administration work to ensure this doesn't happen again?
You've asked the most important question. First of all, let me start by saying that there are any angels in heaven. They're all nurses, male and female. I've been a great consumer of healthcare. I watched what you do. I watched how you treated and gave hope to my sons after their mom and sister were killed. I watched how you dealt with me when I was in ICU years ago with a cranial aneurysm. And I watched how for such a long time you took care of my son Bo when he had stage 4 glioblastoma and with only months, not whether he'd live. So I think you're maybe the single most underestimated profession in the world. I really mean it. I'm not joking. You're incredible. I've been saying that for the last 25 years. Unfortunately, I've been a significant consumer of your professionalism. Look, first, let me start off by thanking you for your courage and putting yourself on the line and your colleagues in your community every single day. And so many of you have died. So many of you have contracted COVID unnecessarily. My son-in-law is a leading surgeon in Philadelphia and reconstructive plastic surgeon for cancer patients. And he, like all the other surgeons, sort of chipped in and dealt with the COVID side. The stories he's told early on about nurses putting garbage bags over their bodies as protection instead because they don't have the protective equipment. You may recall way back in March, I laid out for the president that we should be having a program where we engage the Defense Production Act and use it. There isn't a single reason in the world why we're in a situation where you don't have and everyone else have the protective equipment they need. But he has dawdled so much. Now we still have shortages. We have the inability, for example, as you well know, to even have some of the materials that are needed to swab your nose, right. Little glass vials to test, all those things. We're in our capacity to do, and we can do it quickly. But risking your lives, we ask you to go out and risk your lives, fight the daily pandemic without supplies, support, basic respect for science and for government, without any of that. There's no, the commander-in-chief, as he calls himself, and he is, has a duty to get all you need. Instead, Donald Trump's ignored the warnings, refused to prepare, failed to protect our nation. For months, as I said, we've called on the president to take 4 urgent steps to protect frontline heroes. 1, get all essential workers priority access to PPE. Remember what he said initially when I was pushing that? He said, you guys are selling the PPE. You're stealing from stockpiles and selling it. What a wonderful, wonderful thing to say as you're risking your lives. I've told the nurses I know, because I speak with a lot of them, they're afraid to go home at night. They're trying to figure if they get a hotel room until they can shower and clean, because they're afraid they'll walk into their home and their children or their spouse or their significant other, or their mom or their dad, somebody's going to get it. Second thing, we ought to be able to get free COVID testing and paid sick leave for every worker called back to the job. We have to enforce clear workplace safety standards. OSHA is just an abomination because corporate America doesn't like OSHA. They don't like them telling what they have to do. When they had all these crises in the meatpacking plants, Instead of slowing things up, what they do? Sped up the line. How in God's name are you supposed to space people to be able to do their job, for example, and speed up the line? 4, Congress we have to push it to get all the essential workers the premium pay they deserve. We can do that. And not only is it the right thing to do for them, but it helps the economy. It helps the economy. When you don't have any money to spend, the economy contracts. Trump has done none of it. You know, I'll do that and a lot more to make sure we never are so unprepared for a pandemic again. Immediately get state and local governments the fiscal relief they need to keep vital public services running. 2, launch a fund for cash-strapped states and local health departments to stop new COVID outbreaks in their tracks. 3, build a new public health jobs corps, hiring 100,000 Americans to do contact tracing and testing now, and to fight environmental health issues, opioids, other health inequities long term. Build on Obamacare. He's out in, right now, the president is still in federal court trying to do away with health care. Where you have 100 million people who are covered because they have a pre-existing condition. 20 million people who never had it. He said, get rid of it all. We should build on that with a public option, a Medicare option, a public option. If you can't afford it, you automatically get covered. And we're going to restore the White House Office of Global Health Security. You know, when we left office, our administration put together a pandemic office in the White House because we knew from the way we had to deal with 3 other serious diseases internationally, we knew that there were more to come. We didn't know this was coming for certain, but we put together and we had advanced people. We had CDC having people out around the world to see in advance when these viruses were emerging. We had 44 people in China. He withdrew them from China. We have to boost funding for biomedical research and disease surveillance. We're not spending the money we need to. We have to re-engage with the world so we're ready to prevent the next outbreak. Walls don't stop diseases. We need to work together. And finally, as you note, we need a clear plan for the vaccine. Months ago, I laid out, with the grace of God and the goodwill of the neighbors, as my grandpa would say, we're going to find a vaccine, hopefully sooner than later. But unless we do what I recommended he do relative to testing, unless you have a national plan, a commander who is like look, if we're at war and we had to decide how to get our aircraft and how to get our military persons to the place we most need them, what do you have? You have one commander in charge distributing those forces where they're needed, so he's the only one that knows exactly where it was, not leaving the localities. He's sending them out, or she's sending them out. Well, I suggested about 2 months ago now that we start back then to set up a commander in charge of how we will effectively and efficiently distribute a vaccine when it comes. A massive task of safety, efficiency, and fairly producing and distributing this vaccine when it comes. Millions of lives and livelihoods depend on it. But does anybody think today, if God willing, all of a sudden we found, Lord Almighty, we woke up tomorrow morning and all of a sudden there's a vaccine? What do you think the chances are it gets distributed with any degree of equity and realization across this country to 20 million people? So there's no planning. I don't know what this guy's doing. I'm calling on Trump to commit to 3 principles of integrity for the vaccine and the development. 1, the same principle he should follow, and I'll follow as president. First, independent scientists and public health experts alone must determine when the vaccine is safe and effective. 2, that means no hype, no political pressure. The second thing is it has to be transparency. Clinical vaccine data must be made available to the public for independent expert review. Independent expert review. And third, public report from career FDA experts should submit written recommendations on any vaccine for public review and speak freely on their findings to the public before the Congress. Transparency. And you know we always have a problem with vaccines to begin with. There's a certain number of people who say, I'm not going to take them. Well, what do you think the people are going to do if the president comes along and says, we got a vaccine that works? We're not going to take it unless we have full transparency.
Exactly.
But we need somebody right now putting together, and I proposed a $250 billion plan to lay out exactly how it will be distributed if and when it is made available, God willing. But we need basic planning, block and tackling. We didn't have to get in the mess we're in now. But first and foremost, the president has an obligation to ramp up extensively the PPE for all of you who are risking your lives every day.
Well, we
In
can't
some
wait.
places, there's still shortages.
We can't wait till you're there to do that. And Rick has been, I know you have a hard stop, Mr. Vice President. And so I want to get to the last of the questions, but I want to just say Rick Lucas has been that kind of champion over and over again. We have 200,000 healthcare workers, and I will never forget the call when Rick and his colleagues were talking to me about the lack of PPE. But I just want our members who've watched what you just did in this, you know, people, the knowledge that you have, when I say to people, you get things done, the level of knowledge that you have about government and about how to use these levers and what to do. Could you imagine if we had that kind of transparency on any of the issues that the Trump administration is doing right now? The credibility, you said earlier on, and then I'm going to introduce Marguerite. You said earlier on, one of the things that was so important was about confidence, that kids have confidence, that there be credibility. And just even in terms of just you riffing off what to do with the vaccine, that's how you give the public confidence. And I just want people to hear the kind of extensive knowledge that you have. I mean, I'm sitting here writing down all these notes as you're just riffing off what you need to do on all these different things. It's pretty incredible.
Well, you know, it's because I've hired people that are smarter than me. You know, I got a guy named Ron Klain who took care of the Ebola crisis.
Right.
He ran it. He's with me now. Right. I mean, I'm getting every single, that's not true now, it's slowed up, but 3 days a week, I get an hour to an hour and a half briefing from the leading doctors in the country who are experts in this area, laying out in detail what we should be. This is, anyway, and Rick, if you have any more questions for me, I'll be able to get your number. I'm happy to talk to you if you want to talk more about the plight of nurses right now.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I'm sorry. I know we're.
No, I know. Well, no, I'm just worried about your time. We love having you.
Yeah, I'm supposed to do another event.
So let me introduce our last questioner, Marguerite Ruff. Marguerite, it joins us from Philly, and she is a classroom assistant for special ed students and a member of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers.
Marguerite, I'm married to Philly.
Yes. Good afternoon, and thank you. Most of us have seen and experienced racism and racial injustice in our lives. As a nation, we had a breaking point in the middle of a pandemic and economic crisis when we watched George Floyd call out "Mama," and he was murdered by police. It reminded me of my son, who was also murdered. I imagine my son calling out for me and not being able to protect him. What happened to George Floyd was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was awful. In the middle of the pandemic, we took to the streets, not only for George, but for all who preceded him, documented and undocumented. Enough. I work in Philly and have worked for students and my community for more than 19 years. And there are many small cuts that came before. Under-resourced schools in our Black and brown communities, stagnant wages for school staff, from teachers to counselors to paraprofessionals like myself. We are the foundation of this country. I mean, we taught presidents and CEOs, and yet we have to fight for respect. The healthcare crisis is killing us at an excessive rate compared with everyone else. As president, what will you do to help fix the racial injustice? Not only this racism by police, but also systemically in our education and healthcare and economic structures.
Well, first of all, let me say how sorry I am for your loss. You know, I've lost two children. One to an accident and one to a disease. And it's the one thing a parent never anticipates. You feel like you're being sucked into a black hole inside your chest. You're going to just get lost, and it never goes away. And it doesn't take much to bring it back, like it happened that very moment. Whether it's in my case now with my last child lost, my son, 5 years. But I can't imagine what witnessing what happened to George, because I've spent time with his family, did to bring everything racing back as if the very moment it was happening all over again. Gun violence in this country is a public health epidemic. Not just mass shootings that make the headlines, but also the daily violence that takes so many lives in communities. There's a mass shooting collectively in America every day. It's just made up of a whole lot of small numbers. And my thoughts and prayers aren't going to fix broken laws. We need leaders with the courage to stand up to the NRA, and I've taken on the NRA and won before twice, but as president, I'm telling you what, I'm going to defeat them for good. And but again, my heart goes out to you. I know the feeling. As you said, we need much more than police and criminal justice reform if we're going to really rip out that injustice that is prevalent in society. And that's why I've made racial equity the central part of my Build Back Better plan. I'm going to send you a copy of it, but I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about it here. And that's going to bring back, we have an opportunity to turn something terrible into something good, because I think we've reached an inflection point. The country has had their blinders taken off, and they've seen, oh my God, it really happens. It really happens. And so it covers everything from this plan I have, everything infrastructure to housing to education, and it targets racial wealth and income gaps to rebuild, so we can rebuild strong, inclusive middle class that deals everybody in. Right now, it's across the board. There's systemic racism in every single aspect of our society. Here's an example. I'm going to launch what I call Small Business Opportunity Initiative. Fancy, wonky thing to say, but it expands a program that President Obama and I put in place to boost investment into small businesses of color and to help, which are the foundations of the community. If the community doesn't have a local drugstore, community doesn't have a local supermarket, the community doesn't have a local beauty shop, I mean, they're the centers around which communities are built. And so we're going to also fight to end the deadly health inequities that COVID has amplified. For example, we expand Obamacare with a public option. It's the fastest way to get universal health care. And we can double the funding for healthcare centers that are vital on the front lines, that people can go to needing psychiatric help, needing mental health issues, dealing with drugs, and a whole range of other things. We can make coronavirus testing, treatment, and any vaccine free, that everyone has it, so we don't have to wait in line. Everybody gets it. I'm going to fight to give every child the same strong start in life. Offer universal pre-K for 3 and 4 years olds, number one. Number two, triple the funding for at-risk schools, Title I schools, to close the gap between the rich and the poor here from 15 to 45 billion a year. Boost teacher pay and teacher assistants pay, because we're running short on teachers unrelated to the COVID virus. If we just had everything moving along like it was before, we're going to be short over another 500,000 teachers by 2025. We're going to expand the pipeline of educators of color. You know the numbers. All the great studies have pointed out that in schools where there's students of color, it makes a big difference if the teacher or the teacher's aide is of color. It fundamentally impacts their learning. It's real. It's not some quack thing. Well, great universities over the last 6-8 years have produced these studies. And kids are more likely to stay in school if they have someone like them in the classroom teaching them or caring for them. That's why we're going to fight to close the college race gap and ease the student debt crisis, which has left black college graduates 5 times more likely than white graduates to have to default on their student loans because of their financial circumstances. We're going to fix the public service loan forgiveness program, so that if you, in fact, continue to teach or do what you're doing and you're in school, your debt will be fully forgiven for school. If you do it, and up to $10,000 a year in student debt is forgiven. We're going to make public colleges free for any family earning less than $250,000 or $125,000 a year. Free college. We're going to invest $5 billion in graduate teaching programs at HBCUs, historic black universities, college universities. We're going to fund dual enrollment high school programs, which you're familiar with, a few in Philly, that train aspiring educators early while they're still in high school themselves and get college credits while they're moving. We have an enormous task ahead of us in rebuilding and reinvigorating this economy. But every American deserves a strong foundation and needed to play the role. Last thing I'll say, right now, there's one of the great things that I find that, and I know I went through it as a single parent for 5 years, trying to raise 2 boys, is that the cost of childcare is astronomical. And if you are in that sandwich generation like you are, you may have a parent and or a child that has to be taken care of. And what happens? We don't pay child care workers nearly enough. We don't pay the people who come in to take care of our parents nearly enough. But people can't afford to pay them because they don't have the money. So I set up a program whereby we're going to fund the training of and the advancement of people who are helping with elder care and child care, so they can increase their capacity and their credentials while they are doing what they do. And that's going to create, the estimates are, 3 million good paying jobs. And it's going to allow all those women primarily who are single moms to be able to go back to work because they have a 2 or 3 year old at home that can be actually cared for and be in preschool. So there's so many just simple things we can do. And it's not just turn on the faucet, spending government money. What it means is, and the studies show it, that will increase more income in the pockets of people who are earning a decent wage, growing the economy. You show up and you get 2 new tires on your car. You're able to go out and you go to the grocery store. You're able to make sure you can fix the window in the house that's broken. It increases economic growth. You're familiar probably with Claymont, Delaware, I suspect. It's not far from where you live in Philly, just on the Delaware border, the Pennsylvania border, down by Marcus Hook and Chester and the like. And when I was a kid in grade school, early grades, my dad didn't have a job in Scranton, Pennsylvania, a working class neighborhood we lived in, and we moved down to, my dad, no one in my family had gone to college, my dad and my mom. And we moved down to Claymont, Delaware. And it took a long while. It took about 4 years, my dad, to get enough money to move out of what became Section 8 housing into being able to get a nice split-level home with $18,000. It's now probably worth, I don't know, $125,000 these days. But and we did fine. My dad took care of us. But he used to have an expression. He said, Joey, and I think this is a core what you're talking about. A job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Today, over 50% of the American people think their children will never even reach the standard of living that they have reached. And much of it has to do with systemic racism for Black, Latino, and Asian people. And it's real, but it's totally unnecessary. And by the way, I just don't say this when I'm talking to teachers or African American women. I say this to the Wall Street types because it's overwhelming the interest of the United States of America that we grow the country, open up. My concluding comment, I know I'm staying too long. I'm overstaying my welcome here. But here's the deal. You know,
don't overstay your
I think
welcome.
that there are certain...
You don't overstay your welcome.
Okay, well, thank you. There are points in the history of every country, as a student of history, and that are what we call inflection points, where you reach a point where there's a chance to make a significant change for the better or worse in the country's future because of circumstances that have occurred. Well, as your president has said, we have COVID, we have high unemployment, and we have systemic racism, all hitting at one time. But this is one of those inflection points where the American people are finally saying, oh my God, I didn't realize how bad it was for so many people. And the example I'll give is when Franklin Roosevelt got elected in the middle of the Great Depression. I'm not Franklin Roosevelt. I'm not making myself out to be Roosevelt. But I've given a similar opportunity to find president. Because what did he do? He just didn't take us out of a recession. He built back better. We went from he realizing how many people have been left behind, so we ended up with a thing called Social Security. We ended up putting money into hospitals. We ended up putting didn't get nearly as far as we had to get, but it was a gigantic step from the way things were in 1930 by the time 1948 came around. Well, we're another one of those inflection points. I think the country's ready, and ironically, the things that can build back the country are the very things that can have a phenomenal impact on diminishing racism and making sure they're good-paying jobs. Because we have to build now. We have to invest over $1 trillion in infrastructure, highways, roads, bridges that aren't safe. We got to make sure we have facilities that can produce energy that don't pollute the hell out of them, and make sure that particularly communities of color, on fence-line communities and that are being hurt badly. Look at the number of African Americans that have diabetes. Look at the number of Americans that African Americans. Well, a lot of that goes back to what happens when they were kids. The absence of the right kind of food, the absence of making sure they lived in areas where you could breathe the air, where you could drink the water. Look at all the schools in America today. They're not sure you can turn on that water fountain and drink it when they were open. So there's so much we can do to make the country better, make us more competitive, and in the same process, give people a real chance. And I want to thank you for what you're doing. I really mean it. I know after what happened, it's hard to get up the next morning, but you're getting up to help other people. I found, for what it's worth, I've never given anybody advice for things like this, but you know what? I found the only way to deal with the kind of tragedies you and I have talked about is purpose. Get up in the morning and have a purpose. And you have a purpose. And I promise you I share that purpose with you. I'm going to do my best not to let you down, I promise.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marguerite, for your courage. Thank you, Rick, for your valor. Thank you, Priscilla, for your passion. That's who we represent, Mr. Vice President. That's who they are. And starting today, we are distributing our Biden for President shirts I don't know if I'm getting it right, but where you're going to see people all over the country, remote, virtual. We're doing over 100,000 calls, emails every single day, and 83% of our membership was registered to vote in the last presidential. 73% voted. We're going to get that number up and up and up, and we're going to see you in the White House. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My mom would say, God love you. Thank you. Any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value. I promise you one thing. If Jill and I end up in the White House, you're not going to ever have a better friend for education ever, ever, ever than you've had. I promise you that. There's an overwhelming need for wraparound support for you. You're expected to be a social worker. You're expected to be a counselor. Teaching is not what you do, it's who you are.
He's actually willing to support and stand with us to get to our next step that we need to get to.
No, these are not somebody else's kids. They're all our kids. We're going to triple the amount of money we spend on Title I schools, from $15 billion to $45 billion a year. And I promise you, Randy, I will get it done.
Teachers are often forced to use a scripted curriculum that rushes children through. Will you commit to ending the use of standardized testing in public schools?
Yes. You should be able to set the dynamic as how to teach. Teaching to a test underestimates and discounts the things that are most important for students to know.
We need to get out and vote in mass numbers because our livelihoods depend upon it.
Good afternoon, everyone.